Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to RMZ Webinars. Great that you could join us. And as you probably know, we have Carla with us presenting the webinar on the Education Inspection Framework today. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Carla. But if you do have any questions, please remember to put them in the question box on your control panel. Thanks a lot. Over to you, Carla.
Thanks, Debbie, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It's nice to see so many of you joining us this afternoon. Happy Friday. I hope the weather is dry where you are. It has finally stopped raining in Yorkshire after what seems like forever. So for this webinar, we plan to look at the new inspection framework in a bit more detail and explore some of the elements that labour market data can support. So you might have seen in the blurb, this is the first of a mini-series and acts as a bit of an introduction to some of the key elements within the framework that we think we can support with. Attended a really informative event last week and some of the kind of key themes that are coming through, we feel like we can really speak to them. So we just wanted to do a really short 20-minute webinar as a bit of an overview and introduction. So over the next 20 minutes, I'll give you a very brief overview to RMZ, who we are and what we do for those newbies on today. We'll pick out the key takeaways from some of the pilot inspections and explore in a little bit more detail where local insight can help providers in the new inspection process. We'll then hopefully have a bit of time for questions at the end. So as Debbie said, pop them in the questions section and we'll pick those up towards the end of the webinar. So very, very brief overview of who RMZ are and what we do as a bit of a reminder. So being sure that your curriculum offer benefits your students' employment prospects as well as the local economy is a very, very hard balancing act. Yet we know it's fundamental to an education provider's mission and one of the key focuses of the new inspection framework. So it's our mission at RMZ to help people make better decisions relating to the world of work in a nutshell. So we do this by giving providers robust, detailed labour market data to help them make better understand where you should be focusing your efforts. So whether that be within your curriculum planning cycle, engaging with students, or engaging with employers to promote a more relevant curriculum that meets local labour market needs. And there are some of the colleges that we're working with and organisations that we're working with across the bottom there. So why the need to align your curriculum to local labour market needs and ensure that it meets local employer needs? So FE providers have been under constant pressure by government, local employers and Ofsted to develop a provision that is better aligned to the skills needs of employers, but which is also geared to producing better employment outcomes for learners. So alongside education reforms such as T-levels and the apprenticeship levy, we've just finished and seen the first round of the pilots for the new Education Inspection Framework to be completed. And there's some really interesting changes to the focus and the process of that inspection. So we've got on the slide just an overview of that. I'm sure many of you have seen that up to date, but basically the new framework will see a shift in focus to this quality of education rather than the focus on hard data and statistics. And it'll be broken into three main sections, which we can see on the screen there. So we've got intent, implementation and impact of the quality of education. So we've heard repeatedly in the previous months leading up to this kind of pilot and the consultation phase that the curriculum will be at the heart of that new inspection framework, with the inspection assessing the coverage and appropriateness of the provision. The implementation section will be focused around translating that framework into a structure and narrative within an institutional context, with the inspection really focusing on the delivery, teaching and assessment of the curriculum within that implementation phase. And then we've got the impact part at the end of the inspection, which will evaluate the knowledge and skills that the pupils have gained against expectations. So this is measured through qualifications, progress, destination, and knowledge and skills development. So naturally, the things that immediately jumped out to us as a labour market data provider when going through this new framework was the focus around the relevance and appropriateness of the curriculum. So if we dig deeper into that intent section, as we've got on the screen, we can look at what this means on a practical level for providers and then start to understand how this needs to be evidenced. So I've highlighted 3 of the key points here that bring in that importance of both local and regional insight into the curriculum intent section. And then this will be the main focus for the rest of the webinar today. So there was some really interesting things again around careers advice, kind of the impact, and we hope to pick those up in the next couple of webinars, and I'll give you some more details on that at the end. So firstly, the first thing that I've highlighted is the fact that the framework states that providers should develop a curriculum that develops knowledge, skills and behaviours that prepare learners for the next stage in education, training and or employment. So one of the kind of starting points is that focus around developing a curriculum that prepares learners for the next stages of their career. The framework also highlights that the curriculum should offer learners the knowledge and skills that reflect the needs of the local and regional context. And then it goes on to say that the curriculum intent should take into account the needs of not only the learners' employers, but the local, regional and national, where necessary, economy. So as I said, last week I attended the AOC Education Inspection Framework event, which was really, really helpful in starting to get our head around some of this. So the audience heard from some of the providers who had taken part in those pilot inspections. And I really just wanted to share some of the things that I thought were interesting from these sessions, especially around that intent and implementation focus, and just share some of their experiences with you. The first thing that all pilot colleges fed back was that most of the inspection time is spent on the implementation phase of the framework. So that second part around the delivery, teaching and assessment of the curriculum. But they did state that there was huge emphasis on the intent of the curriculum at the starting point, with really important conversations from the offset around that curriculum design, coverage and appropriateness. There was a deep dive into curriculum, and the word deep dive got used a lot in that curriculum sense. And this was kind of a deep dive into the curriculum areas that were the biggest, the best and the worst. But the nice thing about that biggest, best and worst of the provision was that there was agreement and understanding between the inspection team and the key nominee at the start of the inspection of what areas would be looked at and why. So a much more kind of involved role from the start. That led on to the fact that all the colleges fed back that there was a real switch from the inspector just going from one SMT meeting to the next. Rather than doing that, they kind of tagged onto the curriculum managers and the teaching staff, and they spent the majority of the time within the learning environment, which was actually seen as a really, really nice thing. And I do have to say it was probably the most enthusiastic I've ever seen a group of FE colleges be about an Ofsted inspection framework. So it was nice and refreshing. But yeah, that whole point around inspectors actually interacting with the learners, it was much more tactical, hands-on support I think was used, rather than just sat in SMT meetings or moving from kind of one classroom to the other and sat in the back of the class. So much more practical approach as well to the way the evidence was collected, with all evidence being collected electronically, which allowed that lead inspector to be able to see what was being assessed and inspected throughout the week, and then tailoring the remaining time effectively to see that all areas were sufficiently inspected. And then every single college, I think this is probably the most important part that we took away, every single college shared feedback that the role of the curriculum heads was vital within the new inspection framework. So the curriculum staff took on the role of an extended nominee team, if you like, and the inspectors met with them extensively throughout the inspection to explore curriculum intent, that whole planning process, and really that planning process in regards to the local economic context and the rationale or the intent for that curriculum, pulling in some of those highlighted parts from the previous slide. Last but not least, there was also a heavier focus on employer interaction and involvement within the design of curriculum. So really pulling through some of those employer skills needs, and kind of assessing how the colleges and providers were engaging with local employees and how that was feeding into some of that skills and content design within curriculum. So really, really good feedback, really valuable to attend and see some of the things that were coming through on that. From that feedback, it kind of jumped out to us at MZ that we've maybe been a bit of ahead of the curve possibly in creating that 3-step guide to a more relevant curriculum that we produced late last year. So I really wanted to just share this opportunity to basically go back over this as a bit of a starting point into getting our heads around the new framework. So for those of you who are familiar with MZ webinars and resources, you might recognise these 3 steps on the slide. We introduced these back at the start of the academic year in line with the launch of our course vision tool as a starting point to helping our customers develop a more relevant curriculum in line with the new Ofsted guidelines at the time back then. And I think the key words around that was a meaningful and relevant curriculum, which was really kind of paving the way for this new education inspection framework. So what we believe is that these 3 steps can help a provider in achieving a meaningful curriculum that reflects the needs of kind of national, regional and local economic context, but more importantly also helps learners achieve successful employment outcomes. So I'm just going to take the next 10 minutes and the rest of the webinar to briefly show you each of these points in a little bit more detail, as it might be useful as you start to think about that future planning process, and especially the role that the curriculum staff will play in the inspection. And we've got a really nice case study that kind of puts some of this into context in a few slides. So step 1 is all about reviewing your existing offer, really simply, and establishing how much of it serves the needs of your learners and local employers. So to do this, we need to, in a nutshell, compare existing courses with the related demand in your local area or the area that you serve, whether that be a LEP area, a county, a local authority, or a bespoke region. So we can take the number of course completers in each course area for a given year, and that's taken from your ILR, and then we basically map each course to the jobs that they typically train for through their related SOC codes. After doing that mapping process, the last bit of the puzzle, the last bit of data we need is the annual openings figure in those associated occupations within the region you serve. So we basically have your course area mapped to the occupations that they train for, and then the number next to that will give us the amount of opportunities within a region. So the 3 tables, the top 2 especially, basically highlight that. So we've got kind of areas of oversupply, undersupply, and then areas where there's new opportunity within a region. So if we look at the green bars on each graph, this shows the number of course completions for this made-up college in a given year. So the number of learners who took an engineering course, for example, that year. And then the blue bars show the number of annual job openings, and that includes both new job growth and replacement jobs in the local area for that chosen year. So you've basically got completers against annual openings, and the top one shows oversupply, and then the middle graph shows potential undersupply. So a really black and white view, but a very good starting point as to kind of, it's a line in the sand as to say, where are we against local labour market data? I think there's bigger tools out there, but or even bigger kind of data sets out there, or ways of doing this, but just to see a top 10 growth occupations for a region doesn't necessarily help really identify where you are at present day. If we look at the bottom graph, what this process also allows us to do is identify where annual openings are significant, but that provider currently doesn't offer any courses in that area. So it basically gives the college a top 10 list of potential areas for new course development. So really picks out those areas where there's no logical course or kind of mapping to a course area that there's huge demand within a region. So step 2, having looked at the curriculum as a whole and identified the areas of potential oversupply, undersupply, and then those areas of high demand where there's no provision. What we can then do by mapping each of those course areas to the SOC codes or the occupations that they train for is basically take a deeper dive into that to get a better sense of how those course areas map to local labour market realities. So really helpful for helping us to understand the actual occupations that the courses are connected to. So doing that whole kind of link from careers to courses, but then also the industries that they are employed by. So going that one step further and having a look at the industries that are growing within a region. So on the slide, we've got the engineering subject area or course area, for example. And what I've done is basically begin to pick out some of that data connected to that 26 occupations that we've mapped to that course area. So within that kind of engineering course area, we've got some of the occupations on the slide, such as civil engineers, welding trades, IT engineers, metalworking fitters, a whole host of occupations that sit within that. And then we can start to look at projected job growth, median hourly wages, either as a whole, so they're the top figures, but then also individually for each job, which gives us a really good idea of those types of jobs that people doing engineering courses will go into, and then the local employer demand for them. So, and I said this would be brief. Step 3 is all around identifying the skills and building a strong business case. So recently we've seen a really noticeable shift in how employers view employees, with skills taking a far more prominent place in the hiring process than traditional qualifications or job titles. It's obviously important to providers when developing new and aligning existing provision. So what I wanted to do in this step is basically look at how skills demand can be identified and then used to build a really strong business case for developing new courses. So we've looked at traditional SOC codes up to now. On this slide, we're looking at job postings data and job titles. This gives us a really valuable insight into what local employers are looking for, and particularly in regards to that skills element. So not particularly looking at what occupations people are interested in or we think are growing, but mapping all of those SOC codes to job titles. So making the connection between employers and providers even stronger in terms of understanding those skills needs. So on the purple graph, we've got the top 10 job titles connected with that engineering course area. So the top 10 job titles that employers in the region, so this is for Leeds, have been advertising for in a 12-month period. So not SOC codes, but job titles. So as far as they're concerned, we can see a demand for maintenance engineers, vehicle technicians, and structural engineers. So immediately we see this is much more specific than just engineers. We can really get a hold on what type of engineers they are. So instead of being IT support engineers, we're seeing maintenance and vehicle technicians and engineers. So the bottom graph, the green, shows us the top 10 hard skills that employers say they need from these job postings. So basically, according to the number of times these skills are advertised within the online job posting. So again, unsurprisingly, we see engineer at the top of the list, but what we also do is see some of the skills that we'd maybe not necessarily think of straight away, such as that computer science skill or management. So we can do this for any course area, any specific SOC code or job title, and what it will do is give us a really good idea of what that means in terms of employers or layman's kind of job titles and the skills that they're looking for within those job postings. So looked at job titles that employers are looking for, and then we've looked at the skills that the employers are seeking for within those job titles. What job postings can also do is tell us exactly who are those companies who are looking to fill those positions. So I've used the engineering example again, and what we've basically done is pulled the top 10 companies in the Leeds region that have been looking to hire engineering occupations in the last 6 months. So this takes us way beyond just curriculum planning and course design, because what we can do is pick out the actual positions that these companies are hiring for, and the companies that are recruiting. So it not only helps us build a strong business case for new course development by highlighting the real-time demand, but it also supports business development and employer engagement activities. What this does is give them the intelligence to begin informed conversations with local employers around how they can fill their positions through either apprenticeships or work placements. So really, really valuable data. So that's a bit of an overview of the 3 steps. It's kind of all well and good as telling you that it will help and kind of set you on your way to a more relevant curriculum. But what I wanted to do is just share with you some really nice feedback and a bit of a case study from Basingstoke College of Technology. So to help them achieve their aim of aligning existing provision with the local labour market demand, the college was the first in the country last year to try out our curriculum planning tool, Course Vision. A little bit ahead of the curve around that whole aligning and creating a meaningful, relevant curriculum, and the access to that tool had been given to the college's curriculum managers. So going back to that earlier point around the role of that curriculum manager within the inspection framework, BCOP basically gave access to the tool to curriculum managers, as they were the ones responsible for driving the development of new provision. So they used the tool to upload their ILR data, and as well as identifying areas of strength, potential threats and areas for new development, they from this led to the creation of a business and animal management course. So kind of a live example of where a new course area had been created from identifying local labour market demand. They also were able to use the tool to make a big difference around their relationship with their LEP and how this related back to their HE provision. So although the college understood what the LEP priorities were on a general level, what the tool helped them do was basically dig into those broader priorities in more detail to find out what it meant for them in terms of actual jobs and skills, and specifically this example was within the digital sector. So what they could do is deep dive into that area and look within the region at all the jobs and skills in the digital sector at a level 4 and 5. They also were able to use the tool in their employer engagement processes, particularly in regards to apprenticeship and work placements. So using that business case report that we just looked at, that gives us a lot of that job postings data, the college were able to quickly identify which employers were putting out the most jobs in the area, which then gave them a targeted list of prospects for the work placement team to go and have conversations with, and kind of build those relationships to get work placements and apprenticeship placements. So although this wasn't seen as the reason for investing in the tool initially, and one that we probably hadn't thought of kind of as a starting point, it's proved to be a really great addition for the college in purchasing the tool. So to summarise then, I said it would be short, but I hope this has been useful in giving you a bit of an overview of the new inspection framework, some of the key takeaways from the pilots that we've learnt to date, and then also a bit of a starting point as to how labour market data can support you in creating a curriculum that takes into consideration local and regional economic context, but then also prepares learners for the next stages of education, training or employment. So ultimately, labour market data can't solve all of your inspection needs, but it can help you align your existing curriculum and develop new provision in line with local employer needs. So what this essentially means is that you can evidence that your curriculum is well aligned to local growth areas, and then also be confident that you're contributing to closing skills gaps and improving employability within your region. So that's all from me. We'd love to hear about your issues as always. Any kind of questions, queries, any more detail on anything that we've covered today, my email address and phone number are on the slide. So we'd be really happy to hear from you and have a chat, even if it's just about some of your experiences up to date. As we said, we are planning a series of webinars on this topic, as well as a few more additional materials. I think the next one will focus around views from FE principals about the new framework and a little bit more on how we can support. So do look out for these dates. They're not finalised yet, but we should have some kind of really good interaction with colleges in the sector around their experiences so far. So thank you for your time this afternoon. Have a lovely weekend, and I will be following up with the recording of the webinar, the case study that we've talked about, and then that 3-step guide as a bit of an overview of what we've covered today. So Debbie, do we have any questions?
No, we don't have any questions, but just to let you know, to keep yourself updated on the webinars, keep checking into the MZ website under resources, under webinars, and then you'll be able to make sure you don't miss the next few webinars around this series. Okay, thanks.
Fab. Thanks very much. Have a lovely weekend, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.